This is the all-new Canyon Enduarce CF SLX 8, an endurance road bike that's just about as far removed from the dad bike stereotype as you can get. And I've been fortunate enough to spend the last couple months getting to know the ins and outs of this bike. And in many ways, it's pretty different than any other bike on the market right now, for better, and in some cases, for worse. Now, in this video, I'm gonna be talking about my experience with this bike, the CF SLX 8, and how it rides, how Canyon's proprietary bits have held up, and how it compares to its competitors on the market. If you want to learn more about the entire range of Canyon Enduraces, we actually did a first look video that came out about a month ago, and I'll put a link to that down in the description. That video will feature more information on pricing, specs, and geometry than I'm going to get into here. But now let's get back to talking about this bike, and more specifically, its frame. Because it's with this frame that we first start to see some of the mixed personality of the Endurace start to come out. It's got a taller stack, shorter reach, and longer wheelbase than its predecessor, making for a more upright and relaxed riding position. But the new frame also features big updates in the aero department, with slimmer and deeper tubing across the bike, and of course, those sleek bars that we'll be talking about more later on. This combination of speed and comfort is a trend that carries on throughout the rest of the bike, and that makes it a great quiver killer for a rider looking for one bike that can do pretty much anything. But how does it actually feel out on the road? To be honest, I'm not nearly fast or sensitive enough to speak to Canyon's claimed efficiency increase of 70 watts at 45 kilometers per hour or 28 miles per hour. But what I can tell you is that this bike is a pleasure to ride. The riding position is upright, but not to the point of lulling you into a lethargic pace. The long wheelbase felt stable at speed, but still agile in the corners, and I'm sure helped dampen vibration from the road. All in all, I have been extremely impressed by the ride quality of this new frame. But sadly, it's not all rainbows and butterflies for the Endurace. You see, this newest SLX and also the CFR models of the Endurace have forgone the top tube mounting bolts that are on the other models and replaced it instead with an in-frame internal storage solution that they call Load. And while quite a few other companies have put internal storage in the down tube, I believe that Canyon is the first to put it in the top tube. And quite frankly, there is just not enough room. I couldn't even fit my pack of gummies in here without puncturing a hole in the wrapper to let out the air and squeeze it on in. And in Canyon's defense, they do sell a neoprene tool sleeve that's supposed to be able to slide in here and fits a 3-way multi-tool, a CO2 cartridge, and some tire irons, but there's no way I'd be able to fit my Crank Brothers M19 multi-tool in here. It's just not big enough. All in all, I wish Canyon would have gone ahead and put some down tube storage in this bike and then kept the top tube mounts for riders looking to bring just a bit extra on their longer rides. And I obviously wouldn't have been able to find that out or share that information with you if I hadn't had this bike in person to test. So if you want to see more in-person reviews, go ahead and hit that like button. That'll tell companies like Canyon and others that you like what we're doing on the 99 Spokes channel and encourage them to send us more bikes our way to make videos like this one. Now, let's move on from that brief little gripe and talk about some of the other features on this bike. The first of which is at a bit of a juxtaposition to the aero features we talked about earlier, and that is the quite generous tire clearance, which Canyon claims can fit up to 35 millimeter tires. Wider tires allow for many things, the first being lower pressures, which make the ride a little bit more comfortable and increase your grip. It also opens the door to having a wider selection of tire options. And while I never rode the Endurace on anything other than the 30 millimeter Continental Grand Prix 5000 tires it was spec'd with, the frame and fork easily cleared some 35 millimeter V Tire Co. G Sport tires, and I'd borderline say you could fit 38s. Now, that's not to say that either I or Canyon would recommend the Endurace as a dedicated gravel bike, but it does make it that much more versatile. And speaking of gravel, I did take this bike off the tarmac a couple times and was pretty impressed with the bike's performance. The 30 millimeter tubeless Grand Prix held up with no punctures, and while I wasn't setting any speed records, I was surprised by the amount of grip they provided. And speaking of surprises, I was shocked at just how comfortable this bike is, both on-road and on gravel. And I know that's due in no small part to this VCLS 2.0 seat post. This was my first time on the post, and the difference between it and a standard rigid one was night and day. Cracks and rough patches in the pavement all but disappeared, but somehow without adding any noticeable flex or inefficiency when putting the power down. Another feature that's likely adding to that comfort is the seat tube clamp, which sits low in the frame and I'm sure increases the compliance that much more. And as silly as it sounds, this VCLS 2.0 seat post is probably the thing I'm gonna miss most about this bike when I have to give it back. It really is that good. But let's move on now and talk about some of the other interesting components on the bike. Moving to the front of the bike with the CP0018 Aerocockpit bar stem combo. Canyon has been speccing this on its racier bikes for years, but this is the first time they've showed up on the Endurace. Obviously, the SRAM force brake lines are routed fully internally through the bars, increasing aerodynamics and aesthetics. But that is just the tip of the iceberg, because while this may look like a one-piece bar stem combo, it's actually made up of 3 pieces. These detachable cockpit wings can move in or out, allowing for up to 40 millimeters of bar width adjustment. The quill-style stem can also adjust cockpit height by 5, 10, or 15 millimeters without needing to cut your steerer tube. I set my bike up in the highest and widest setting, and I'm happy to report that that was a very easy process. The bike even came stock with enough bar tape to make up for the extra 20 millimeters of width on either side. And while this setup worked fine for me, it's important to note that the CP0018 cannot be swapped for a conventional bar stem setup. I think the biggest issue with this is going to come down to stem length, because that's the only thing that cannot be adjusted with this setup here. And adding to that complication is the fact that Canyon is a direct-to-consumer brand, which means you're likely not going to get a chance to try this bike out before you buy it. That said, if you fit within Canyon's suggested sizing and you don't have, an oddly proportioned body, I don't think you're going to have an issue getting this cockpit fit right for you. The last component I want to talk about is the drivetrain. And this was my first time riding the SRAM Force ETAP setup, and I have to say I was extremely impressed. The shifts were smooth and consistent, and while it did take a couple rides to get used to the unconventional lever action, it now feels quite natural. Equally impressive as that shifting quality is the battery life. SRAM claims that each one of these Axis batteries can get you 60 hours of ride time. And if you want to see me test that out, go ahead and let me know in the comments. I'll do a range test and we'll see just how true that claim really is. One last thing that I definitely want to mention is that this bike comes with SRAM's Quark power meter. This is once again an interesting and relatively unique addition for an endurance bike at this price, but will be a welcome addition for riders planning to race or at least seriously train on the Endurace. So now that you've heard a little bit about my experience with the Canyon Enduarce CF SLX8, I want to talk about how it compares with other competitors on the market. More specifically, the Trek Domane SL7 and the Vitus Venon Evo RS. Price-wise, the Canyon lies in the middle, costing $5,499 US, with the Vitus coming in at $4,699 and the Trek at $7,499. Each of these well-rounded endurance road bikes feature the same SRAM Force ETAP drivetrain, and the Trek and the Canyon both come with carbon fiber wheels and a carbon fiber Aerocockpit. The Vitus, on the other hand, comes with alloy wheels and a more traditional bar stem combination. It's also worth noting that the Trek and Canyon both include the power meter, whereas the Vitus does not. And while the Domane may have what I consider to be a far superior in-frame storage solution, the Canyon still beats out both of these bikes when you look at the spec and feature to price ratio. But now let's go ahead and talk about the geometry. And all 3 of these bikes share relatively similar modern endurance numbers, but the Canyon does have the highest stack to reach ratio, giving it a more upright riding position than the others. Interestingly, it also has the shortest wheelbase, with the shortest chainstays and steepest head tube angle. All in all, each of these endurance bikes brings something different to the table. But in this case, I am going to give the win to the Canyon Enduarce CF SLX8. Its ability to blend speed and comfort and a pretty untouchable price point given its spec is impressive. And like I said at the start of the video, makes it an ideal option for riders looking for one bike to tackle everything from epic grand fondos to cobblestone crit races. As long as you can get along with the fit of the one-piece Aerocockpit and don't mind the comically inefficient top tube storage. If you have any more questions about the Canyon Endurace, then go ahead and drop those down there in the comments. And if you want to see more in-person reviews like this one, then be sure to subscribe to the 99 Spokes YouTube channel. Lastly, remember that bikes are for everybody. Have fun out there.